Helloween from Hamburg, Germany was formed by guys who'd been playing in a few different bands already. The first official lineup was together as Iron Fist in 1982 and included Kai Hansen on vocals and guitar, Michael Kiske on guitar, Marcus Grosskopf on bass, and Ingo Schwichtenberg on drums. In 1983, they changed their name to Helloween. We didn't want to carry on using Iron Fist because Motorhead had an album out with that title, and we didn't want to have any connections with them. We were searching for a few months without success, then Ingo saw a film called Helloween and suggested we call ourselves by that name. We thought it was a good name, but we didn't want to name ourselves after a film, so we replaced the A with an E and called ourselves Helloween. After rehearsing for over a year and playing local shows, Helloween would appear on the German metal compilation album Death Metal in 1984 with 2 tracks. I have no idea what Ornst means, but both Ornst of Life and Metal Invaders are pretty solidly in a speed thrash metal vein. But the impressive guitar work already has a sense of structure to it, along with catchy, headbanging melodies. The fan reaction to the Helloween tracks was so positive that Noise Records offered the band a contract, and in April of the following year, they'd release a self-titled EP. The EP again goes mostly in a speed metal direction, with gruff, raspy vocals from Kai. However, the more unique elements of Helloween are already starting to show, including the more classically inspired solos. The conceptual touches here are interesting too. The movie Ingo saw was obviously John Carpenter's 1978 slasher classic, Helloween, and the Helloween EP would make another connection to the series by kicking off with a song taken from Helloween 3, Season of the Witch. It's quirky and fun, and it is about Helloween, so it's not a huge stretch, even out of context. But if you aren't aware of the connection, it's kind of a bizarre opening. However, this jingle would become a theme for the band that they'd use to open their concerts. Also, the cover features the first appearance of the short-lived Helloween mascot, Fangface, bursting out of a pumpkin. He'd also appear on Helloween's first full-length album, Walls of Jericho, released later that same year. Musically, Walls of Jericho is pretty much a continuation of the EP, with most of the focus on lightning-fast riffs and fist-pumping choruses. just from a speed metal perspective, this is a really solid album, with lots of energy and aggression in the tracks. But you can also feel Helloween experimenting with more compositional elements here too, and exploring more upbeat, uplifting melodies. There's also a little more of the neoclassical guitar work here too, all of which gave Helloween a different feel compared to other German speed metal bands of the time. In fact, on the track Gorgar, they straight up quote "In the Hall of the Mountain King" by Edvard Grieg. This album also opens with the music from Helloween 3, but this time without the lyrics. So now, it's just London Bridge is falling down, making it even more confusing. But that's more of an observation than an issue, since an undertone of humor is part of the band's package anyway. At this point though, Kai was finding it difficult to handle both the vocals and the exceedingly complex guitar passages at the same time. Plus, the band wanted a dedicated vocalist who could help take them to the next level musically. We're having problems in finding anyone good who can suit our style of music. What we want is somebody who's similar to Bruce Dickinson or Jeff Tate. As they continued searching for a frontman, they'd put out a single for Judas, which would be the last Helloween track to feature Kai on lead vocals. After being turned down by Ralph Sheepers of Tyrant Pace, they'd set their sights on 18-year-old Michael Kiske, who initially also wasn't interested. Nowadays, I actually enjoy some of the songs from Walls of Jericho, but in those days, it wasn't my type of music. It sounded to me like one song the whole time, the same song, always speedy speedy. It's not very fair to the record. I listen to it differently now. Eventually, they'd talk Michael into attending a Helloween rehearsal to hear some of the more sophisticated tracks they'd written for his voice. The chemistry between the guys and their vision for the next album convinced Kiske to come on board, and Helloween approached Noise Records about a plan for a double album. This idea was shot down though, and they were forced to release their next project in 2 parts. The first being Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 1 in 1987. Widely regarded as the first proper power metal album, Keeper of the Seven Keys goes all in on the compositional song structures, neoclassical guitar solos, and epic melodies, while also adding the final element with Michael Kiske's soaring vocals. And again, I can't overstate the guitar work. I'm Alive in particular has one of my favorite Helloween guitar sections. thing that stands out to me about this album is how positive it is, both in the melodies and the lyrics, especially at a time when heavy metal was largely known for its darker, more occult aspects. The entire album is excellent, but one of the standout tracks is the 13-minute epic Helloween, which got a music video that unfortunately butchered it into a 5-minute travesty. We see what looks like a waiter with a pumpkin head in the woods, but he explodes apparently, and we move on to the band. As they play, some other characters show up too, wearing what I assume are meant to be Halloween costumes.
In the streets on Helloween, there's something going on. Now we do escape the paranoia. In the streets on Helloween, the spirits will arise. Make your choice in terror.
The Pumpkinhead Waiter shows back up again to lead this procession of weirdos through the forest. The outfits are really bizarre, like there's a random gypsy lady, some kind of Madonna person. It all has a very Rocky Horror Picture Show feel to it. It's still a pretty fun video, but with over half the song hacked out, it just doesn't capture the true epicness of the track. Because Michael Wycath was sick during recording, both guitar parts on this album were handled by Kai, with Wycath only appearing on the excellent ballad, A Tale That Wasn't Right. I also love the cover. I suppose the argument could be made that it's still Fangface, since it looks to be the same kind of robe from Walls of Jericho. But I prefer to think it's something more like the Time Trapper from DC Comics. But regardless, the album was a huge hit, especially in America and Japan.
Irgendwie haben wir wohl viel Platten verkauft in kurzer Zeit. Und das war dann irgendwie ganz toll und dann haben wir uns gefreut. Und jetzt, ja, es war so, also es haben uns viele Leute prophezeit. Auch also während der Produktion und es ist halt passiert und wir freuen uns drüber.
Still, tensions were starting to rise within the band, with arguments over touring schedules and creative direction. But thankfully, the lineup would remain together to put out Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 in 1988. This is another album full of awesome, epic tracks, starting with the absolutely flawless Eagle Fly Free. But since the concept of power metal hadn't really been defined yet, it was difficult to place Helloween's unique style into a specific metal subgenre.
We have a lot of different stuff on that album. It's not just one direction, not just fast or
It goes in all directions.
Yeah, we are everything. We are a speed metal band, a thrash metal band, and heavy
No, we're
rock
not
band.
not that very much thrash, so but
that's
we
what
like
they
to
said.
play that sometimes.
We
yeah.
are not, no.
No.
So would you say you're changing your direction and trying to lose the thrash tag?
Well, I think we never have been, except on the Walls of Jericho and so on, but from Keeper One it was getting away from real thrash. I think it was still heavy in a way, but more classical. And this is the direction I think we want to go more into.
This album also featured more involvement from Michael Kiske, who added songs with a bit more commercial appeal, like Dr. Steam.
The steam grows body creatures, lets them run into the night. They become great rock musicians in the time is right. Time is right.
By the way, I love that they're not even pretending to really play their instruments here.
Fellows blue and gray, or sometimes pink and green. Just check it out on Helloween. Dr. Steve grows funny creatures, lets them run into the night. They become great politicians and entertainers, right?
Kiske would also contribute the epic entry for this album, the exceptional title track.
Make the people hold each other's hands and fill their hearts with truth. You made up your mind, so do as divine.
Like Helloween from the previous album, there are so many different melodies and awesome guitar passages that it hardly feels like a 13-minute song.
Throw the first key into the sea of hate.
The album would get one video for the track I Want Out, which Kai wrote specifically about his desire to leave the band. This was the first song I ever discovered by Helloween, and I was hooked immediately. Again, the elaborate solos and Michael's voice are the perfect combination of melody and power. Due to ongoing internal issues and disagreements within the band, as well as the continuous touring, Kai would finally leave Helloween in late 1988, and along with Ralf Scheepers, would eventually start Gamma Ray, another outstanding German power metal band. Kai would be replaced in Helloween by Roland Grappow.
Since you got a new member, do your sound change or intentionally?
No, I don't think that the sound will change. You know, and I don't think that anything will change. You know, it's maybe hard to believe for.
It will be. I mean, we try to make a different album every time. It should be different because it gets boring, and the next one will be different to the part two. The same as the other ones before, be different with each other. I mean, that's normal.
Helloween would spend the next couple years getting out of their contract with Noise Records, and would eventually sign with EMI to release their fourth album, the oddly titled Pink Bubbles Go Ape.
We
we felt like, let's do something really stupid. And I was talking on the phone with White, the guitar player. And I said, we should do something really stupid. Something really stupid, something like pink bubbles or anything like that. And then he said, hey, it's a good idea. Yeah, pink bubbles, what could they do then? And then I said, pink bubbles go wild. And I said, no. And then he said, what about nuts? Pink bubbles go nuts?
Or banana.
Yeah, it's good, but nuts is another cliche. And then we had pink bubbles go ape. Yeah, that's it.
I wouldn't say stupid, but Pink Bubbles Go Ape is definitely weird. From the visual design to the music, everything about this album just feels kind of random.
Tonight we go to see the hanging little lobsters. Hanging little lobsters. It must feel nice to be a hanging little lobster. Hanging little lobster. Nothing sets you free like the hanging little lobster.
There is some decent stuff on here though, with tracks like Someone's Crying and Mankind. But then there's also some straight up off the wall stuff on here too. Overall, it's more hard rock than heavy metal, with touches of other stuff thrown in, like prog and even some AOR. But for me, there's just not much that stands out, and at least 2 of the tracks were apparently meant to be B-sides, so maybe lack of material was an issue too. The track Kids of the Century got a music video that's just as bananas as the rest of the album.
The future we already feel. She's like no way out. She's like there's no doubt. The future looks bright.
Kids of the Century is the first song on the album. And I think we've just chosen that song because we felt like it's a good first video. It's not too wimpy, you know, it's not too heavy. It is a bit different, but not too different, it just fits.
The video is just a series of random weird visuals that don't seem to relate to each other in any way, which is also sort of how I describe the album. It really feels like Helloween is struggling with their sound and direction here, due to both the departure of a major creative force for the band and moving into the grunge era 90s.
Some of the songs on the new album aren't that different to Walls of Jericho. It's just a natural development that happened. But it's not like, that was too heavy, we're not doing that anymore. We just do what we want. And the next record, I think, will be much more different than the new one is to the ones before.
Helloween's 5th album, Chameleon, would definitely be different, and not necessarily in a good way. The album does have its defenders now, but at the time, it was a pretty jarring difference.
The question that you hear most of the time, which is the most silly questions you can ask, is like, why is this record sounding different than the other ones? The answer is because it's a new record. Nowadays, everybody's expecting you to do the same stuff, but that is not what music is about to me, you know? Helloween is not a style or a sound or direction. Helloween is a band, you know? And we do whatever we like.
The majority of Chameleon goes into these weird, almost experimental directions, and members of the band would later describe it as essentially a 3-person solo album.
He's looking for trouble day by day. Don't waste time, you run away. He kept me taken by surprise.
Nowadays it's pretty hip to be hard, you know? Don't show any feelings or something. And I think I'm not afraid of showing emotions or anything. And I just express myself through the music. So the music has to change because the music always has to reflect how you feel. I felt like a chameleon, you know? So that's how the title came up.
Of course, bands should continue to grow and explore different ideas. But when you get that far removed that fast from the original premise, you're essentially a different project. The songs aren't bad in and of themselves, but they're very far away from power metal or what fans of Helloween would expect. This album would get one video for Win the Sinner, a jazzy 90s track with way too many horns. I know it looks like there are things going on in the video, but there's not. Again, it's just random visuals. They're in a saloon, they're in a corporate office, they're at a sumo wrestling match. Nothing makes any sense. At this point, even more issues started to pile up onto the already unstable band. They'd find out that Ingo, who had already been struggling with drug and alcohol abuse, was also dealing with hereditary schizophrenia, and they'd make the difficult decision to let him go. They'd also get dropped by EMI after the performance of Chameleon, and eventually break ties with Michael Kiske as well. People thought we were crazy for firing a singer like Kiske, but listening to what he's doing now, I hope people will understand why we made that decision. If somebody is trying to push the whole thing into a direction you don't like, you have to react. You have to change something, hopefully for the better, which was Master of the Rings. That was the direction we wanted to go, but Michael didn't want to go this way. So goodbye, my friend. It was like that. Helloween would recover fairly quickly though, and with vocalist Andi Deris and drummer Uli Kush on board, they'd sign with Castle Records and record their 6th album, Master of the Rings. This album immediately feels back on track, with a return to power, melody, and a more focused sound. I like Master of the Rings a lot. It is still on the lighter side, but the songwriting is really good. And Andi is a good fit too, with a voice somewhere between Kai and Michael's. Kind of surprisingly, this album got 3 music videos. I'll start with my favorite, Perfect Gentleman, where we're at a swanky party that gets crashed by a guy who looks like the offspring of Beetlejuice and Kid Rock's better dressed younger brother. goes around being an asshole and a nuisance while aggressively hitting on every woman at the party.
Yes, I am a perfect gentleman. Yes, I am a perfect gentleman. Yes, I am.
No one is into it though, and eventually the women all team up to knock this joker out and toss him into the dumpster. The video for Where the Rain Grows isn't as fun, but the song is great and feels more like what you'd expect from a follow-up to Keeper of the Seven Keys. The band literally run into some business guy with a briefcase who's on his way to the beach where he suddenly undresses, puts on what looks to be some kind of tribal clothing, and starts a fire before downing a Red Bull and beginning some mysterious ritual.
So I take my life back from where the rain grows, die to survive. That's from where the rain grows.
The guy gets all hopped up on energy drinks and dances around the fire while Michael and Roland lay down a proper Helloween double solo. The guy wakes up the next morning and has a quick shave before removing all evidence of his cultural reappropriation, and then moves on to wherever the hell he could possibly be going for the day. The third video was for the slower and steamier track, Mr. Ego.
Take me down to the ground. Just let me feel it. If I let someone down, please welcome him on the losing side.
If there's a narrative here, it's too paper thin to figure out. As close as I can tell, Billy Idol's dad is having headaches, which are illustrated by images of him wearing a straitjacket while a hot blonde chick dances in front of him. So, who really knows? Tragically, Ingo would take his own life in 1995 by jumping in front of a subway train, and Helloween would dedicate their 7th album, The Time of the Oath, to their former drummer. The Time of the Oath does get a bit heavier, but I still think the songwriting is stronger on Master of the Rings. That said, this is still a pretty solid entry with plenty of aggressive standout tracks. And the guitar work, as usual, is a high point, with Roland and Michael both going into a variety of styles. Like Master of the Rings, The Time of the Oath got 3 music videos, starting with Power.
From sources unknown, we are the ones
The track is decent and I like the look of the video, but otherwise, it's pretty uneventful. This was followed by the video for the title track, which brought back the confusing visuals. This time focusing mostly on a caravan of people carrying random items in the desert. Even though the video somehow cuts 3 minutes from the song, it's still pretty solid overall. I think the third video has the best song though, Forever and One. With 2 solid albums under their belt, this lineup of Helloween proved they were capable of putting out quality power metal tracks, even if they were still honing their overall sound.
Overall, I think we are all very satisfied. We are all very proud of it, which doesn't mean that we are not able to do a much better album, but this was the best we could do during the days.
And they actually would make an even better album with their 8th, Better Than Raw. Overall, Better Than Raw is a great Helloween album. It feels more passionate, more energetic, and more consistent than the previous 2 releases to me, and it's easily their heaviest since the Keepers albums. It's also heavy on atmosphere, catchy melodies, and expressive solos.
Well, a lot of people tell us they love it and it's great, so we must have done something right this time.
This time we tried hard not to do any concept at all.
Everything was very spontaneous and not so planned like the records before.
It seems the band felt especially comfortable together when recording this album, which perhaps led to a more creative but also more cohesive album.
Not only because of two successful albums with the certain people in the band, also the understanding in the band and the chemistry. It's something that has been proven on 2 world tours and 3 long studio sessions.
However, Better Than Raw would only get 2 videos, including Hey Lord. I think there are better tracks on the album, but this is a solid lighter one with a pretty sweet bridge. The second video was for the more aggressive but uplifting track, I Can. The following year would see Helloween release an album of covers called Metal Jukebox, which is an album you can listen to. Then, after signing with Nuclear Blast Records, they'd release The Dark Ride in 2000. As the title suggests, this album overall does go a bit darker than previous Helloween releases.
Like it's got a different attitude because we thought it might be cool to do something slightly different from what we did before.
We really thought about it to do something new because we want to have or reach a different step now.
It's not drastically different to me though, and really just seems to build on the previous album. It does go into a few other directions, but stays mostly around heavier hard rock, with plenty of power metal included as well.
In another dimension, you may find paradise. We'll be safe and warm. I've been told to be everyone. I am so close at the end. There will be no fear.
The Dark Ride only got one video though, for the track If I Could Fly.
No fear, no pain, nobody left to blame. I'll try alone, make destiny my own. I learned to free my mind, myself I now must find.
It's a somewhat lighter track compared to the rest of the album, but the chorus is still super powerful.
If I could fly like a king of the sky, could not tumble nor fall, I would picture it all. If I could fly, see the world through my eyes, would not stumble nor fail.
Despite the earlier feelings of camaraderie within the band, both Roland and Uli would get let go after touring for this album. It seems there were the typical musical differences, along with other general conflicts, including Roland and Uli's new side project, Masterplan. They'd be replaced by guitarist Sasha Gersner and drummer Mark Cross to record Helloween's next album, Rabbit Don't Come Easy. Unfortunately, Mark would get sick after completing only 2 tracks, and they'd bring in drummer Mickey D of King Diamond and Motorhead to complete the album. Rabbit Don't Come Easy ends up being a pretty solid album, although it doesn't quite reach the level of some previous ones for me.
Hey now, open your life. Rise now, feel the new drive. Hey now, open your life.
Apparently, following The Dark Ride, there was a push to go back to a more happy Halloween sound for some reason, and I suppose this album accomplishes that as well. Also, the opening track, Just a Little Sign, would get a video featuring cheesy spaceship CGI. There's enough good stuff on Rabbit Don't Come Easy to make it worth checking out, but for me, it was mostly just okay. Drummer Stefan Schwartzman would join for the tour, but he wouldn't quite gel with the band, and he'd soon be replaced by Daniel Lubla. With the lineup again complete, Helloween would move to Steamhammer and get back in the studio to record Keeper of the Seven Keys, The Legacy. Rather than a compilation of the first 2 Keepers albums, which is what the title would seem to imply at a casual glance, this double album is essentially Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 3. Somebody from the record company told Wyke how happy he is with the new lineup. He said something like, "That lineup is really strong. With that lineup, you can make a keeper album," just to explain how strong it is. And then we thought, why don't we try it? But then we decided to do it very differently. The actual thing was not to copy that old stuff, the good old stuff, but to do something new. I think it's a very cool album. The real question, though, is does it live up to such a lofty title? And the short answer is yes. While there are other rock genres brought in and a more modern sound overall, this album is fantastic and still maintains the powerful, uplifting, and melodic spirit of the Keepers' albums. But even so, it's really a different band now too, since they're down to 2 of the original members. So you don't have Kai's classically focused solos or Michael Kiske's vocals, although he does technically appear on the album in the opening to Occasion Avenue. I like that they found a way to tie in those first albums, but of course, Andi is awesome too, and his own style absolutely fits. And as always, the solos here from Michael and Sasha are excellent. There'd be 2 videos from this album, including Mrs. God, where the Almighty is looking through her center files and sees Andi Helloween, like it's his last name or something. And we see Mr. Helloween get into an argument with his girlfriend and then slap the ass of a total stranger, which really gets him into trouble. Because of this, he gets the worst possible punishment a metalhead can receive: a haircut. It turns out it was all a ruse though, just to teach him a lesson, and Andi thankfully still has all his hair. The second video was for the track Light the Universe, and co-starred Candice Knight, aka Mrs. Richie Blackmore. But the more interesting guest spot is filled by a live-action version of the Keeper himself. Oh, and there's also something about some kid who won't wake up. But then the Keeper is joined by another Keeper, and another one, until eventually there's a whole group. So instead of the Keeper of the 7 keys, I guess it's now the 7 keepers of 1 key each. And instead of throwing them into the sea, now the keys all unlock a chest together. Somehow, all of this causes the little boy to wake up, which is probably a metaphor for something. They'd follow this up in 2007 with Gambling with the Devil, which I actually like even more. Overall, this is another super melodic album with a huge focus on catchy, powerful tracks like The Saints.
They're taking
were 2 videos for this album, including As Long As I Fall.
As long as I fall, I don't hit the ground. As long as I fall, I'm safe and sound. As long as I fly, I sure cannot die. I don't need to hear it call. As long as I fall.
Paint a New World also got a video with lots of footage of horrible things in the news. Both of these songs are fine, but I think the rest of the album is a bit better. In 2009, Helloween would release a 25th anniversary album containing rearranged and re-recorded material played in symphonic Broadway, acoustic rock, and jazz styles. And boy, it's rough. I really only bring it up because they made a video for Dr. Steam, which should give you an idea of what I'm talking about.
Dr. Steam bros, funny creatures, that's them right into the night. They become great rock musicians and their time is right.
This would be followed in 2010 with Helloween's 13th album, 7 Sinners, now on Sony. After Unarmed, we were ready for some real stuff, you know? Without having discussed what we were going to do, everybody had this will to do some very heavy stuff. The first 2 tracks we had were Are You Metal and Where the Sinners Go, and that was the direction we loved, so we kinda left it untouched, just gave it a heavy sound, and put the other songs around it. At this point, Helloween had pretty much nailed down their sound, and this is another overall solid album. It's packed with great heavy metal tracks, mostly on the powerful, more aggressive side, with incredibly catchy choruses. And it also gets extra points from me for having a loose sequel to Perfect Gentleman in the excellent track, Who is Mr. Madman?
16 years have passed since he, one, perfect of his kind, the Casanova of his time, crowned himself to conquer the land in craving for lust.
Apparently the poor guy ended up in a wheelchair and an insane asylum. Seven Sinners got one video for the track Are You Metal, where we see 3 girls wearing helmets like they're in a Saw movie. It turns out they need to retrieve the shuriken-looking thing from the album cover to leave the room, but they have to remove their helmets to do so. The first 2 girls try, but can't handle the metal. The third girl, though, is a natural headbanger, and easily snags the throwing star thing to unlock the door. Helloween would maintain this mix of old school and modern with their 14th album, Straight Out of Hell, in 2013. And again, this is a super solid, super melodic and heavy album. And even if it's not exactly pushing any boundaries, the entire thing is extremely fun to listen to. And the solos continue to kick ass. There'd only be one video for this album, for the opening track, Nabatea. The song and the video focus on the story of Nabatea, an ancient Arabian civilization.
And I learned that this was something like the first democracy 3,000 years ago. It used to be a legend, a myth, so to say, like Atlantis. And sooner or later we all had to learn that it's not only a legend, it turned out to be true. And there's the song, there's the video, and we had some fun doing it.
Later that year, Helloween would appear at Rock in Rio with special guest Kai Hansen, and the guys would seem to enjoy playing together again.
Do you already have plans to come back in Rio for another concert?
I'll be back with my band Gamma Ray in 30th of November.
Don't we do this together? Is it South America?
Yeah, we do it together, actually. Helloween and Gamma Ray.
Part 2.
In 2015, Helloween would be back on Nuclear Blast Records to release My God-Given Right. This one continues with the same formula as before, and it's still good, although not quite as engaging for me as previous Helloween albums. Still some great stuff on here though. My God-Given Right got 2 music videos, including Lost in America.
We are high, we are far, but we wonder where we are. We are lost, lost in America. There's a cloud, there's a star. We should plunder the sky more. We are lost, lost in America.
And the title track, which is one of the highlights on the album for me.
What is left there for me? I come to claim to win the game. Why should I please for my fair and right move? I come to play, I come to stay.
The video is a well-done but pretty standard chase set in a dystopian future where a lady is on the run from some cool-looking Helloween stormtroopers.
It's my God-given right to stand and fight for what I like. It's my God-given brain that cried in pain. Would I reside?
Not long after this, it was revealed that not only was the band back on good terms with Kai Hansen, but they'd also patched things up with Michael Kiske. And in 2017, Helloween would release the single Pumpkins United, with Kai, Michael, and Andi all on vocals.
Here we are, here we go. Shout it out, let them know. Like a bright shining star, pumpkins
touring with the Pumpkins United lineup, all 7 members would stay together to release Helloween's 16th and most recent album, the self-titled Helloween, in 2021. Overall, this is possibly my favorite 21st century Helloween album, with some excellent artwork and tons of standout tracks. And while Andi is perfectly fine on his own, having Michael back adds another dynamic to the sound, and I really like them together. Though nonetheless, the opening track, Out for the Glory, also got a video with a cool animated visual style. The closing track, Skyfall, would also get a video, where we see an alien craft crash land onto a planet. Things don't look good for the little guy, so Andi Deris Iron Man's up and flies out to save the alien pilot, who's now being held in some facility.
Hey little alien, little gray, where's the place your people stay? Have you found a place beyond where eternity moves on?
They escape, of course, and after a few more epic solos, finally reach their destination, Pumpkin Coordinates in Galaxy Metal. And that is Helloween, a hugely influential band in power metal and German heavy metal. There's lots of homework here, so I'll break it into sections. From the early years with Kai, I'd check out the self-titled EP and Walls of Jericho. And of course, Keeper of the Seven Keys Parts 1 and 2 are both essential listens. From what we'll call the Grappow years, Master of the Rings really grew on me. More so than the Time of the Oath, but I'll put it on here too since I know many people really like it a lot. But personally, I enjoyed Better Than Raw and The Dark Ride more overall. Everything after that is good too to some degree, and a lot of it depends on personal taste. But for me, the 21st century albums that I would recommend are The Keeper of the Seven Keys, The Legacy, Gambling with the Devil, Seven Sinners, and Straight Out of Hell, with extra emphasis on the most recent self-titled album. I'm gonna put Rabbit Don't Come Easy and My God-Given Right under extra credit, but these may stand out to you more than they did for me, so let me know down below. I really hope you enjoyed looking back at the crazy history of Helloween, their expansive catalog of music videos, and their mini albums. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Thank you! See you!